We're looking at the Indian growth story and projections being made by the World Bank. Now, the World Bank has gone ahead and slashed the economic growth forecast for FY23 for India. Now they're saying the Indian economy is expected to grow 6.5%. It's a drop of 1% from their previous projection in June this year. And the World Bank is citing the deteriorating international environment for the kind of revision they are making about India's growth. The World Bank, though, is also noting that India is recovering stronger than the rest of the world from the pandemic. And the Indian economy has grown by 8.7% already in the previous year. Also, raising the alarm for the world, the International Monetary Fund says that the global economy could lose as much as 4 trillion in output. The IMF says the situation will likely worsen before it actually improves. All of this, even as the World Trade Organization, the WTO, has cut estimates for global trade to 1% from the previous 3.4%, and that's a substantial slashing. But here's what we got from the Managing Director of the International Monetary Fund. Listen in.
We will be flagging that the risks of recession are rising. Our estimate is that 1/3 of countries around the world, this is the 1/3 share of the world economy, would experience at least 2 consecutive quarters of contraction this year and next year. And even in countries where growth is positive, for hundreds and millions of people, it would feel like recession because inflation is eating into real incomes. Overall, we expect global output as a result of all this to shrink between now and 2026 by $4 trillion.
All right, so those are the kind of projections being made by the International Monetary Fund. But let's get in perspective on this as well. Mitali Nikore is founder and economist at Nikore Associates. And Zico Dasgupta is an economist and assistant professor at Azim Premji University. Great to have you both with us this evening. First to you, Mitali Nikore, about the state of the Indian economy right now and how we are doing versus the rest of the world. Is there more clarity that's coming out with the kind of data? Some of that high-frequency indicators that we've seen in recent times, the macro data that we've been poring over, including the kind of projections that are being made by bodies like the International Monetary Fund. Where do you peg the immediate future of the Indian economy? Are we going to be that beacon for the world, or is it going to be a measured way where we stand out only in relative terms?
So thanks a lot, Vikram, for having me here, and a very good evening. I think that it's very clear when we look at the relative data that we are already a beacon for a number of reasons. I think one of the biggest reasons that was highlighted today actually at the World Bank press release, in addition to this growth data, was around poverty management that's come out, from the bank. While we can, of course, agree or disagree on the level of multidimensional poverty that is prevailing in the country at this moment, that is a separate discussion. But at the same time, we must understand that India has done very well globally in terms of preventing slides into poverty during COVID. So we have seen an increase in income inequality. We have definitely seen, issues with how, the kind of social protection we could have given, much more could have been given. But at the same time, it has, been acknowledged that the public distribution system, the PM Garib Kalyan Anna Yojana, and some of the other cash transfer and fuel transfer schemes that were brought into place in the social protection architecture, the way it was expanded at a very fast pace and delivered in an efficient manner, have been lauded by the World Bank today as well, in addition to our growth figures. Now, when it comes to the state of the economy as a whole, definitely we can see a little bit of a divide emerging in the economy in the post-COVID period. We know that we are experiencing a K-shaped recovery to some extent, and there are certain sectors that are doing much better than others. I think it's a time for reevaluation, reassessment to see which sectors can really serve us well in a future which is more climate resilient, in a more sustainable way in the next 10 or 20 years, but also look at the sectors that we need to invest in for the next 5 years
Yes.
to really capture that momentum.
Yes.
An example being electric vehicles.
Right.
That is a sector where India can really stand out and be a global leader.
Zico, Dasgupta, do weigh in on this, because when you talk about the contributors to the kind of growth story that India would bring for itself and the rest of the world, in terms of turning our economy into a manufacturing hub, and that's the part that was the missing link, is that an opportunity that will help us grow that much faster? Whether it's in relative terms or whether it's our own domestic growth-driven story, despite the inflation, despite everything else, do you think that's the opportunity that India needs to tap into to be able to be that beacon that Mitali says that we certainly seem to be?
Well, first of all, of course, we need to, but the big question is that whether we can, given the kind of economic situation that we are in, and given the policy framework. I think there are 2-3 questions at hand. First of all, as you correctly pointed out, there is both a question of the relative performance as well as an absolute performance. Now, of course, this is a period of high inflation, and there is a broad, tendency of global economic slowdown, and every economy has been hit by this broad slowdown and inflation pressures. Though I think during times like this, it's not the best time perhaps to think about which of the economies have performed worse than the others. It would be the case that all the economies have been hit. And moreover, I think it also needs to be kept in mind that the extent to which India has been perceived to perform well vis-a-vis other countries also include the base effect. Not to forget, the 8.5% growth rate of the previous year was essentially on the back of the negative growth rate that was witnessed in the previous year. And one, useful example is that suppose my income is 100 rupees today, tomorrow it falls to 90 rupees, and day after tomorrow it again goes back to 100. If one simply puts the growth rate between tomorrow and day after tomorrow, one would see that growth rate as high as more than 11%. Though over the period as a whole, perhaps nothing has much happened as far as my income is concerned. So that's an important question. But coming back, going beyond the growth figures or the relative performance, coming back to the challenge that you were asking,
yes.
I think the broad structural challenge has been that how to boost investments and demand over the period.
Yes.
And of course, related to the question of employment generation.
Yes.
One important challenge which the Indian economy has faced in the last 2-3 decades is that where would the demand come from? Typically during the decade of 2000s, where we witnessed high growth phase, it was primarily provided by the global economic boom. Exports played an important role. Even during a mini boom, just before the demonetization,
yes.
after 2013, it was also a period of reduction in the crude oil prices, which also
Correct.
helped improvement in the
that's
current.
where we are seeing a bit of a reversal, and that's where perhaps the challenge does come in.
Exactly.
Mitali,
Exactly.
don't you think that the kind of crude oil prices that we are seeing right now, the kind of prices for gold, for one, which is something that we import a lot of, and the yawning gap when it comes to the current account deficit, that has been a continuing problem. Are these going to be roadblocks to growth? Because if you're not able to build our exports at a time like this, which is, of course, under a huge shadow of doubt, because there are recessionary trends all over the world, if domestic growth is going to be dependent on getting crude in the first place, isn't that a major roadblock that India will need to overcome?
So I think, Vikram, I'll answer your question in 3 parts. The first is with respect to, what is our vision for India in 10 years or India in 5 years? If we want to capture the potential of the economy has been laid out by the IMF. Today, the economy is at the fifth largest in the world. The IMF projects that if we make some good choices with respect to our debt management and with respect to investments, especially as you pointed out, manufacturing sector investments and service sector investments, we could be well on our way to being the fourth largest economy by 2027. So, but what are those choices? And will we make the right choices? Is really the question that we are facing today, which is why it's such a pivotal moment in history that we could become the fourth largest economy if we made the right choices. And those exactly are the questions that you've pointed out. If we choose to invest today in a greater amount of renewable energy, which goes into rural areas, decentralized power production, decentralized energy supply, which can reduce our oil bills, then we can move in the right direction. If we start to invest in infrastructure for our cities, unlocking cities as engines of growth. I just want to share a personal anecdote. I was in Europe a few weeks ago attending a conference. I was able to make it from my location where I was living to the venue in 6 minutes with three interchanges on the public transport. In Delhi, I can't even dream of making it in 46 minutes. Even that is less time. If I have to get from just one place to another. So we really need to think about the choices we are making today. What are we investing in to see where we land in 5 years' time?
Exactly, and whether we have the wherewithal or not to do that is also a big question, because while the center has been nudging private enterprise to go in for more capex, that, as we saw in the recently put out high-frequency indicators, we are lacking on that count, Zico. And if capex doesn't pick up, then another roadblock is on its way, and we won't be able to steal the thunder from the world in trying to create the manufacturing hub that we want to create. How does one get past that?
Yeah, that's correct, Vikram. I think there are, the most important issue over here is that there exists a two-way relationship between capex and overall demand of the economy. If capex rises, if investment rises, of course, demand would rise and GDP would grow. But it is also the case, which is missed by many people, that investment also depends on the state of the economy or the level of economic activity. Typically, it would depend on the capacity utilization rate or the perceived profits of the firms. The fact that the level of demand is itself low, it means that the capacity utilization rates are low and firms are not willing to invest, which means there has to be additional policies, maybe in the form of government expenditures, which can boost the demand and hence investment as well. In other words, with the export stimulus gone, with high oil prices, there needs to be an alternative form of demand stimulus and also expenditures to perhaps relax structural bottlenecks like in agriculture, or which can relax the food prices as well. So I think the role of policies in terms of the fisc becomes extremely important at this juncture.
Important question to ask is, if we are going to spur the domestic economy, Mitali, how is the government placed right now to put more money in the hands of people? Because we're living in these highly inflationary times, and unless we do that, then the domestic growth story is not going to happen. Plus, we have the headwinds from the global recession.
Yes, exactly, Vikram. And I think that is really the conundrum today, that, what can we do to make the last rupee that is spent on social protection go as far as it can in terms of supporting the common person, supporting the common woman more than even the common man, because it is actually the women who are more affected because of inflation, because of gender wage gaps, and because of being outside of the labor force, and they are unable to exercise their financial independence. And I think in order to do that, we need to start reimagining our social protection systems. We need to start evaluating which of the social protection schemes are really working in the least cost and providing the highest amount of benefit. If it is cash transfer schemes, then we should expand cash transfer schemes rather than calling them freebies. And if it is schemes around public distribution system, if it is Narega, then we should think about expanding those schemes. So I think at this point in time, really need to make data-driven choices
Yes.
to say that we are going to invest in this type of social protection system
Yes.
and not this one.
Well, like you said, it's a pivotal moment for the Indian economy, and the choices that we make right now are really going to determine whether we are able to achieve the kind of targets that we'd like to achieve to be able to see India on that growth path, and perhaps the opportunities right here, right now to make those choices. We'll keep watching that space. The Indian economy right now, as far as all the projections go, there is a downgrade, but we are still holding out that beacon. Thanks, Zico. Thanks, Mitali, for joining us on this edition of India Tonight.